Today on BRStv, we have our second update of the BRS 160. Hi, I'm Ryan, your host of BRStv. This week we have our second update on the BRS 160, focusing on two elements where we're at battle with the money-eating nudies we mentioned last time, as well as share some experience we've had with the CO2 scrubbing media. When we saw the first signs of the money-eating nudies, it certainly seemed like bad news, but in a way it was also pretty cool because it's an awesome opportunity to share with the BRS community that you're not a bad reefer if you end up with a pest in your tank, because despite everyone's best efforts, it can happen to most of us. And this is an opportunity to show what we did when we encountered them, as well as what our results were. Well, I'm happy to say by simply adding a single 6-line RAS and dosing the combination of KZ flatworm stop and coral booster, our nudie issue is not only what I'd call manageable, but if you didn't know any better, non-existent. Literally no sign of them at this point. None of the Monty colonies show any signs of adults or eggs. That doesn't mean that they're not in there somewhere, because they probably are, but they're not reaching a population that is going to have an impact on the corals. In fact, the two colonies, which I thought were complete goners for sure, because they were covered in adults and eggs, had lost almost all of their tissue, color was gone, and polyps retracted completely, are now back to 70% of their original size. Color is back, and they're encrusting the rock as fast as ever. I know for sure the 6-line RAS is a huge help, because day one I could see him eating them and actively going after each one he could find. It is hard to say what impact the flatworm stop and coral booster combo had. It's not completely clear how flatworm stop works, but the information I found suggests it works by both increasing the slime coat of the coral as well as making it unpalatable to the flatworms which are trying to eat it. The coral booster combination is also designed to regenerate the tissue faster than predators can eat it. I know a lot of reefers have had success using this combo to keep acro-eating flatworms at a manageable population that doesn't impact the tank. Hard to say if it's doing the same with the money-eating nudies, but it certainly seems possible, maybe even plausible, and anecdotally I'm certainly happy the nudies are no longer an issue in this tank. Once I run out of both products, which will be a couple months from now, I'll likely attempt to stop using them both and see what happens. Outside of that, we started using the CO2 media on the tank because there are 50 people in the warehouse here breathing CO2 in the air, which is the primary cause of low pH in most people's tanks. The pH of the BRS 160 was lower than I might generally like, hovering between 7.8 and 8.0, depending on the time of day, and on occasion even dipping down to 7.7. As I mentioned, in a vast majority of cases, low tank pH is directly related to the amount of people and pets in the room breathing carbon dioxide into the air, which in turn increases the amount of carbon dioxide in the tank through gas exchange on the water surface and skimmer. The increased CO2 levels directly lower the pH of the tank as well. Opening windows to bring in fresh air and remove the excess carbon dioxide in the room will almost certainly solve the problem, but opening windows is only a temporary solution, and the fluctuations might cause larger chemistry issues we'll explain in a moment. We also need to think about why it is we even want to raise the pH to 8.3 to begin with. It's been strongly theorized, and even some solid studies done which almost definitively show corals calcify and grow significantly faster at higher pHs. Short and sweet, it's believed that the corals are allowing bicarbonate and calcium ions through their thin tissue and precipitating them out to form their skeletal structure and grow. As part of that process, they split off a hydrogen from the bicarbonate, which decreases the pH inside the coral's tissue. More or less, that hydrogen lowers the pH inside the tissue, and they need to send that hydrogen back through their tissue into the surrounding tank water to raise their internal pH back up and keep the growth going. It's just a lot easier to free themselves of the hydrogen when the surrounding tank's pH is higher and there's less overall hydrogen in the tank water itself. End of story. Higher pH in your tank, the higher the pH will be inside the coral's tissue. The higher the pH inside the coral's tissue, the faster they'll precipitate the skeletal structure and grow. So faster coral growth is why so many reefers are chasing a pH of 8.3. That said, normally I'd recommend, as long as the pH is consistently above 7.8, not to mess with it, because you can do more harm than good in most cases. All the chemicals labeled pH buffer and pH additives mess with the alkalinity balance pretty bad, and I'd avoid them for sure. The only pH elevating additives worth considering are balanced calcium and alkalinity approaches like kalkwasser and many of the two-part additives. Outside of that, you can raise your tank's pH by using a refugium that grows macroalgae, most commonly done at night. The growing algae will consume the excess CO2 in the tank as it grows. As I mentioned before, you can also open your windows or even run an air line from the outdoors to your skimmer. This might impact the air injection and skimmer performance if the line is more than a handful of feet from the tank. This is where the CO2 scrubbing media comes in. Rather than run a line outdoors, you can set a canister of CO2 absorbent media next to the tank and feed your skimmers air through it, which should strip most of the CO2 from the air entering the skimmer. Since the skimmer is one of the primary air-water interfaces for gas exchange in most reef tanks, this can have a huge impact on the tank's pH, and it certainly did on the BRS 160. Once we put the CO2 scrubber media on the skimmer, we saw the pH skyrocket from a range of 7.8 to 8.0 all the way to ranging from 8.2 to 8.35. It is absolutely the cure for all the people in our warehouse, resulting in high CO2 levels and the tank's low pH. This is also the most interesting part. The calcium and alkalinity levels immediately started to plummet. I eventually had to double the tank's dose to 2 parts to get it to stabilize at the new higher pH levels. To me, this suggests the corals are consuming the calcium and alkalinity twice as fast at this new higher pH, and absolutely matches the reason why someone would want to raise their tank's pH, as well as the elevated pH growth studies that show this. I'll openly admit that even though the results here directly matches the goals of maintaining a higher pH tank, as well as the results of endless studies on the negative impact that ocean acidification has on coral calcification and slow coral growth, none of us here at BRS expected the calcium and alkalinity consumption to instantly double the moment the pH was raised to a more ideal level for corals. It might be the higher pH is just increasing the precipitation, but it's been running this way for months and I haven't seen any signs of that on pumps or heaters. It could also be just a mix of precipitation and growth. We already have some pH-related growth studies planned for BRStv Investigates, which will hopefully further the conversation a bit. Now there are some caveats to this. The media isn't free and I ended up using a cartridge a week, which is about $7 a week and more than some people might want to spend. However, considering a lot of reefers pay $100 to a few $100 for a frag the size of a nickel, increasing growth rates up to 50% for all of your corals might be well worth it. In fact, that $7 might be the single most cost-effective way of providing significant growth increases. How much media you use is a direct correlation between the amount of air your skimmer draws and the CO2 levels of your home. Many of you might get a cartridge to last 2 to 3 times as long, which significantly lowers the overall cost of implementation. In the end, a single cartridge wasn't my favorite implementation because when it's fully depleted, the pH of the tank drops, calcium and alkalinity consumption in the tank drops, and if you don't change your calcium and alkalinity dosing system to match that, the levels will start to rise. This is just a pretty unstable environment on all elements. I tried using dual cartridges to help reduce the maintenance and find additional stability, but then ultimately went to a huge dual canister implementation, which I hope I don't have to change but every couple months. I also plan on swapping out the large canisters as the first one depletes in hopes of getting as close to 100% utilization of each canister as possible. These large canisters aren't cheap, but I think you could easily DIY a version with a piece of 4-inch PVC pipe and some caps. Won't look as cool, and because you can't see the color change, you'll have to monitor the endpoint with a pH meter, but it will perform exactly the same. Just make sure to install it vertically to reduce air channeling as the media settles. Outside of that, in an attempt to get an even more stable pH and get longer usable life from the cartridges, we use the Neptune Apex and a solenoid on the skimmer's airline, so it only draws air from the CO2 scrubber when the pH is below 8.2, which is primarily at night. Net result is the pH is a really stable 8.2 to 8.25 on the weekdays when the BRS team is at the office. And 8.2 to 8.3 on the weekends when only a few people are here, adding CO2 to the air. We also doubled the lifespan of the media. I haven't completely perfected this system, but I'm already very happy with it and plan on using the media for the foreseeable future. We're going to explore a variety of different implementations, see if we can at least partially recharge the media, and share our findings in the BRStv Investigates video I mentioned earlier. For those of you that are wondering what the CO2 scrubber media is, it's generally referred to as soda lime, which is predominantly a pelletized calcium hydroxide, known as kalkwasser in our industry. The material we use is a medical grade soda lime, which is over 93% calcium hydroxide mixed with a small amount of sodium hydroxide and a zeolite designed to keep the media moist to maximize usable life. As the soda lime depletes, the carbon dioxide reacts with the calcium hydroxide to form calcium carbonate. I believe that's going to make it difficult to recharge, but we'll absolutely look at the methods to do that and make this a more affordable solution. So So that wraps up today's episode. I'm gonna take my wife and brand new son on his first vacation, so RT's gonna step up to the plate and do 2 BRStv 52 FAQs a week while I'm gone, which will be fun. As soon as I get back, I think we're gonna start doing some really cool BRStv Investigates episodes. Some of these might just take a month or two to get the results, so I think they're gonna be worth waiting for. I'll see all of you early next year, so everyone enjoy the holidays and your reef tanks.